Some of my favorite places in Kyoto look like there's nothing life-changing from the outside. I'm a firm believer that a spot doesn't need to have a 2-hour line to be great. Today I want to show you how an area that's just 15 minutes away from the city center jumped to the top of my favorites list. Welcome to Tofukuji. Tofukuji is technically one of the city's major Zen temples, but in mid-May, the autumn rush is months away. The sea of famous maple trees are a brilliant, shocking green instead of fiery red, and the tour buses are nowhere to be seen. So I grabbed a quick energy jelly at the convenience store, hopped on a train, and walked right into a completely different version of what you see in tourist photos. This is the version that allows you to breathe. As I walked onto the grounds, the city noise just drops away. You're greeted by a canopy of fresh green leaves that filters the morning light into something soft and playful. As you walk in, you're greeted by the Tsutenkyo Bridge. That's not the famous one that this place is known for just yet, but you can see it across the way. The main event is the Tsutenkyo Bridge, which literally means bridge to heaven. It's a covered wooden corridor spanning a deep, lush valley with so many maple trees on both sides. It was originally built all the way back in 1380 so that the monks wouldn't have to painfully climb up and down the steep ravine just to get to the other side. This time in May, it was a sea of fresh green momiji, or maple leaves. I can only imagine how gorgeous and fiery red this must look in November. But these spring leaves had a distinct, brilliant charm all on their own. As I was standing on the bridge, it felt less like a viewing platform and more like you're floating on top of a green ocean. Standing here, I realized that even centuries ago, they knew exactly what they were doing. Generations later, people would stand exactly where I was standing, completely enveloped on all sides by a breathtaking canopy of leaves. What a gorgeous frame, bridge to heaven indeed. I was really glad to be here without the sea of people that pack into this place during the fall season. It allowed me to appreciate the way it was constructed a bit more. I found out that the bridge we walk on today was faithfully rebuilt in 1951, following traditional joinery and designed specifically to withstand the test of time. Because it's a hashiro, or a covered bridge, the roof naturally protects the timber underneath from the harsh elements, allowing the wood to age gracefully over decades. It undergoes continuous maintenance by local craftsmen. If you look closely at the roof lines, you'll see circular green clay tiles that cap the ends. These are called gatto, and they're stamped with the traditional tomoe whirlpool motif. Because these massive wooden complexes were historically vulnerable to fires, the whirlpool design acts as a water talisman to protect the structure. Walking through, I noticed how they subtly integrated modern power lines and lighting into the old architecture, but it's so well hidden that the atmosphere remains completely untouched. The Tofukuji complex's layout follows the classic Zen master plan, aligning its massive halls in a straight line from south to north to mirror the human body. Scattered throughout the massive complex are about 2,000 maple trees, and a few early bird or off-season trees were actually showing some hints of red. The bridge path led me up a few stone steps towards the inner structures, and the quiet was broken by the deep rhythmic sound of monks chanting from the inside. It was the exact peace and quiet and immersion that I was looking for on my last day in Japan. Just past the chanting, I came across the Western Garden. Its raked gravel and square moss plots form a striking checkerboard pattern. It really reminded me of a giant chessboard, like Alice and the White Rabbit were about to pop up around the corner. Right next to it is the Kaisando, the Founders Hall. And inside, the architecture shifts to a gorgeous classic style with polished tile floors and elevated altar room beneath a dark wood-paneled ceiling. By the way, all of these structures I'm mentioning are noted on the brochures and pamphlets that you receive at the entrance. I find that context helps me enjoy the place more. So if you want to know more about any place you're visiting, you can usually ask for an English version wherever you visit. I walked through the grounds some more, and I came across a team of young men meticulously pruning some branches. I ended up just standing there watching them work for a bit. I realized that the foliage that I was admiring had a certain symmetry, and that symmetry came from this exact daily devotion that keeps the place looking lush instead of overgrown. Eventually, I made my way to the Hojo, or the Abbot's Hall. Inside the Abbot's Hall, the wood underfoot is smooth and centuries old. Let's say the creaking wood here had a certain gravitas to it. Every step forces you to slow your pace and find the silence within yourself. But the real masterpiece here transitions from the wood to the garden. The Abbot's Hall features gardens on all four sides, but the south garden was my absolute favorite. It's a masterclass in negative space. The raked gravel represents the sea, the massive boulders represent mountains, and the checkerboard moss pattern towards the back bridges the gap between structured human design and wild nature. It was easy to make the decision to sit here for a while. I just sat down on the smooth wooden veranda, wiggled my toes, and spent a good 30 minutes staring at the garden. I didn't actually have Tofukuji on my original agenda. This was just tagged as a potato day since I had an evening flight, and it completely fit the bill. On my way out, I even caught a glimpse of someone receiving a goshuin, the sacred calligraphy stamp the temples give to commemorate your visit. It was quite beautiful to watch the way the lady did the calligraphy, but you need a special notebook if you'd like to receive one of these. Before leaving the temple grounds entirely, I did what I always do. I visited the toilet. In a Zen temple, the restroom is called a tosu, and Tofukuji holds the title for the oldest and largest surviving tosu in all of Japan, dating all the way back to the Muromachi period. Kids affectionately call it the Hyakunin Benjo, or restroom for 100 people. Back in the day, a tosu was always built right next to the meditation hall for efficiency. But it wasn't just a restroom. The waste was systemically collected and used as essential compost manure for Kyoto's vegetable farms. It sounds a bit gross, but it was actually a massive source of income for the temple, helping to sustain the monks and maintain the structures that we enjoy today. Little tidbits like these, I really stopped to read the signs for because it contextualizes how a city eventually amasses so much depth and history. By now, my stomach was rumbling and it was lunchtime. The weather was great in late spring, sunny but perfect with a nice little breeze cutting through the warmth. I actually opened my phone and asked Gemini for a lunch recommendation, and it led me to a tiny soba shop that I almost couldn't find. From the main road, the entrance looks like a private residential path that leads nowhere. I actually thought that Google Maps made a mistake. But I followed along and ducked inside, and it felt exactly like stepping into someone's home. Low tables, tatami mats, and an immediate smile on my face. I was at first seated in a cozy corner that I eventually realized was the designated kids table, as it was the only spot that was free. But as soon as a table opened up by the window, I asked to transfer. I'm really glad I did because it looked out onto a refreshing little back garden that looks like it popped straight out of a Studio Ghibli film. While I was filming the outside view, the food arrived. They called it fuku soba, and my goodness, this was easily the best soba of my life. It came with this savory candied herring and a side of fried tofu. Specifically, I think this is called kitsune tofu. The lady at the shop gave me a little handwritten illustrated guide in English. I think I was the only tourist there. In the end, I ended up ordering extra noodles just because it was that good. And when you're finished with the noodles, they give you soba-yu, the warm, starchy water that's used to cook the soba. There's a guide that says to pour it directly into your remaining dipping sauce that turns it into a savory broth. I was a little skeptical at first, but when I tried it, the flavors balanced out beautifully. It actually tasted like a very comforting tea, and it's packed with the vitamins that they want to give you. Little deliberate touches like these, without the outright built for tourist energy, for me, that's what really makes the trip. I originally planned to head to a different recommendation for dessert, but as I was walking back out to the street, I spotted a place that I originally thought was a pottery store. It turned out that they also serve matcha, and their usucha set, or thin ceremonial matcha with no milk or sugar, turned out to be great. The set arrived, including a piece of rich nama chocolate. It was the absolute perfect morning, to be honest. Sitting there, I couldn't even bring myself to feel bad that I'd be flying home later that night. Kyoto is one of the most visited cities in the world, drawing millions of travelers every year. But I don't think you need to seek out a completely desolate remote wilderness just to find some peace on your holiday here. When I travel, I still want the balance, access to great little shops, a phenomenal meal, and maybe a quiet tea house somewhere. On the one free morning left before my evening flight, I found exactly that right here in Tofukuji, just one stop away from Kyoto Station. All it took to find this was a willingness to slow down. Kyoto can be overwhelming if you let the crowds dictate your itinerary. But places like this, visited at the right time, reminds me that the city's true magic isn't found in checking off a top 10 list. Yes, Tofukuji is famous for its autumn colors, but you can discover its soul just as easily, and maybe even a little better if you swing by off-season. The centuries of longevity you can witness in the old wood of the bridges, the thousands of maples thoughtfully dotting the complex, the rock garden that's maintained with absolute devotion, and all the little surprises that you'll find on your own trip. This place asked nothing of me except to just be there. To sit, watch the green leaves moving in the wind, sip some tea and be still. And more often than not, isn't that the whole point? I hope you consider this as one of the places to visit on your next trip and enjoy it as much as I did. See you in the next video.